Hello, I'm Dawn Westmoreland, coming from Asheville, North Carolina, WPVM FM LP 103.7. Today, we're going to talk about HR because HR is about what I'm all about, safe and respectful work environments. And every week you can listen to the show Thursdays at 4:30 to 5, or wherever you're at, you can stream it. Today, I have a good friend and a fellow HR person who has over 20 years of HR experience. He's a wealth of knowledge. And you're hailing from Pennsylvania. What city?
I'm in Stewartstown, Pennsylvania, which is probably a town or city that no one's ever heard of. But to give you a perspective, I'm about an hour and 15 minutes below Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, that's so cool.
I'm so close to the Maryland line, I could almost throw a rock into it.
Oh, be darned. Well, today we're going to talk about mass exiting from the workplace. Mm-hmm. I've noticed for a long time that when people are unhappy, they leave the workplace. And Ryan's an expert at this. He is a really good HR person with tons of knowledge. So let's get going with that. Why are people leaving the workplace today? You've been working with this for so long.
Yeah, Dawn, it's interesting. I mean, it's gotten so bad that we actually have a name for it. You know how things kind of come up and, you give it a title or some kind of nomenclature to really be able to identify it. And they're calling this the mass resignation. And that terminology has come out within the last 6 months to, 6 to 9 months. Because of the sheer numerical influence of what's happening. We look at numbers and data all the time from a workforce and business standpoint. Stands to reason we would do so from a human resources standpoint as well. And what we've recognized is this notion of mass resignation. And to kind of give you a sense of what we mean by a mass resignation is, between the months of about June and December of 2021, we had 9.7 million people resign their jobs, which is really almost an unheard of statistic. This is, in mass, people are saying, okay, I've had enough. I'm out of the workforce. And I think that there's a lot of contributing factors to that. And that's some of what I want to talk about today. It's an issue that we need to recognize and not bury our heads in the sand and say, things will go back to normal once the pandemic goes over. But I think the pandemic is only one aspect of the contributing factors.
Yeah. Now, you and I both have been HR working for other people, mostly me in the government, and I think you've mostly been in this civilian sector. Is that correct?
Yes, I have worked in the public sector, the private sector, startups, and nonprofits.
Okay. And today you are an HR consultant. Yeah. So how do you keep up with all these trends with people leaving the workplace?
Well, I think that the reason that most people call upon me for HR consulting is they have pain. They have some kind of pain that they're looking to resolve. And turnover is one of those issues. That is a significant cost. Think about the biggest line item, budget line item for most organizations today, and it's salaries. And so once you're constantly turning folks over, you have to realize that there's a great deal of cost that goes into that turnover. Mm-hmm. I've seen different statistics and numbers bantied about in terms of the cost of turnover, for as little as $10,000 per turnover at the front line level, to even folks saying, hey, it's really more like time and a half that person's annual salary is equivalent to the cost of turnover. And I've heard even at the executive levels, it can go up to 2.5 to 3 times that person's salary. So that tells you that there is significant cost. Think about it from this aspect, that we spend so much time up front with the recruiting and the sourcing and the screening and the selection and the orientation and the onboarding and the training and development, only to release them into the organization and have them turn over. And most turnover is exhibited within the first 6 months of employment. And that's an interesting statistic in and of itself, because I think it helps us recognize that there must have been, a misfit of some sort, or misalignment between the human resources and the company. And so what are we doing wrong there? And that's where they kind of call me in and say, what's going on here? Why are we turning over so many employees? And different industries have different turnover rates that are standardized. This industry, it's typical to have 50% turnover. In this industry, it's unheard of to have, 50% turnover. But regardless of that fact, there are very common elements that exist in those organizations that have high turnover. And those are the things that I address and come in and provide solutions to.
So what are your thoughts about the leadership? They know the cost. They know that they have to market somebody, recruit, get them on board, train them, maybe certify them. They know that ahead of time. So why aren't they taking care of that? Why aren't they taking care of their people, I should say?
What a great question. So let me ask you this. Have you ever heard the saying, people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses?
Yes, it's a good quote.
I think it is. I think it's, has a lot of truth behind it. And so oftentimes those leaders are the ones that you would think that would question, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Are the ones that are perpetuating the problems that are driving people out of the workforce. So I think it's a lack of self-awareness oftentimes. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a lack of education. And what I mean by lack of education is we right now are experiencing a real detriment of the fact that in the late 80s, we started seeing people downsized, right-sized, and all kinds of sized. And it's also a time in which we started to hear phrases like, well, training's a luxury we can no longer afford. And knowledge is power, and I'm going to hold it close to my vest. So we kind of had this, like quiet storm that came together, and this confluence of all these factors really contributed to this great deal of, we had the breakdown of the psychological contract between the employer and the employee. And that psychological contract basically says, hey, as an employee, if I continue to show up and do a good job, I'm going to continue to have work. And from the employer perspective, if you continue to show up and do a good job, I'm going to continue to pay you. Well, those kind of things broke apart when we started to see, mergers and acquisitions and people losing their jobs through no fault of their own. It decimated the loyalty and the two-way kind of relationship that existed between employer and employee. So I think that's definitely a contributing factor. And why aren't leaders taking care of these things? Well, they may not be incentivized, financially speaking, to take care of those things. You would think that they would be because of the cost of all of that turnover. But if they don't recognize that they're contributing or contributing to those issues, then they look outside of themselves and blame other things. And it can't be me. It's got to be this thing out here. It's got to be the market. It's got to be, we just don't have educated enough, candidates to be able to bring into the workforce. So I think we're very busy addressing the symptoms instead of the core issues. And that's pretty common in the workplace as well, as you might know.
Yes. Ryan, is there more leaders or managers out in the workforce?
There are very few leaders in the workforce. And, to that question, I think embedded in that is a distinction that I think we are called to draw out. We all too often, to our detriment, hear people use the terms management and leadership interchangeably when they are vastly different from one to another. And management, let's break down the etymology of the word. It's all about control. Okay, so to manage is to control something. And menta is the mind, to control the mind in some ways. Okay, but leadership is about that inspiration, that motivation, that attractive vision that really inspires people to go beyond who they are currently. Whereas management is very much a control mechanism. Stay within the system, stay within the processes and procedures. I think we do a pretty good job of educating people on management tools, but I think we have been very reticent to develop people in the areas of leadership. And I think that it goes back to that confluence of the breakdown of the psychological contract, as well as the drying up of the training budgets. The baby boomers were really the last generation that had budgets plenty set aside for development and professional development, education and training. And we started to see that really kind of go away. And so I think that that's a big part of the issue is we don't have people that are being trained to be leaders. And with so much self-protectionism going on in the workforce right now, knowledge is power, and I'm going to hold it close to my vest. It's not being given back through mentorship and tutelage and apprenticeship as it had in prior generations. And so we're seeing the perfect storm as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. So let's say somebody calls you from a company, maybe it's a large company, and they say, I have a high turnover, Ryan, and I don't know what to do and why people are leaving. Can you give us some answers to what you would suggest to the company manager or leader? Absolutely. Well, probably manager. If they're leader, they're probably not leaving. Excuse me.
I think what it comes down to, Dawn, is there are two major factors. There's people and there's processes. And so I'm going to go in there and look at their processes. And then if they have solid processes, then I'm going to start looking at their people and saying, why aren't these processes working for you? And to not put too fine of a point on it, I think it comes down to those two factors. So we're going to look at their processes and procedures and see if they're in alignment with best practices for attracting, engaging, and retaining talent. And if those aren't taking place, then we institute those processes that will enable that. If those processes are in place, but we're still achieving high levels of turnover, then we have to look at to what extent are we adhering to those processes. I mean, there's always a person behind those processes that are making decisions that are either in alignment or in misalignment with those processes. So we're going to find out exactly what is the core issue and address the core issue, not just the symptoms.
Mm-hmm. So companies have a mission and vision statement. Most of them do, especially the larger. But do you think they actually follow what they put out?
It's funny you say that. I often joke in training environments and so forth about that very point that, oftentimes they have, a vision or mission that's on a sign on the wall. And then you kind of pull an employee aside and say, hey, what's your vision or mission? I don't know. It's on the sign on the wall, going to the headquarters office, but I can't remember what it is. And you would be shocked at how many people would say exactly that. Oh, it's on a sign on a wall somewhere. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Well, if your employees, especially your leadership, can't quote, verse for verse, what your mission statement is, what your vision statement is, then they lack a sense of what their overall purpose and connection to that higher purpose is. And I think that that's the real issue is people are dissatisfied with just a job. They want a career. They want a fulfilling experience where they know that they're making a difference. And if there is an alignment between a lofty vision or ideal of what they want to be and their particular role, they lose connection. And it's that connection that gives us the motivation to show up every day at 8 a.m., ready to work and those kind of things. It's that kind of environment that knows that, hey, we're doing something that's a little bigger than ourselves. And you think about people, we want to be involved in something that's bigger than ourselves. We want to know that we made a difference before we exit this world. And we're not tapping into that human condition that is present in all people. We are only asking people to show up, do what they're asked to do, collect a paycheck at the end of the 2 weeks, and then go back home and live their lives. And I think that notion of work is just lost on most people. I think most people are looking for something bigger and greater than what exists now. And I think that's evidence in the mass resignation that we're experiencing.
I want to talk about exit surveys.
Mm-hmm.
Some companies, I know the government, sometimes some of the agencies use it where, they ask why the person is leaving. Do you think that they're effective?
So it will depend. So over the 20 plus years I've been in human resource management, I have been a strict adherent to exit interviews. I think they are valuable in and of themselves. I would provide exit interviews only to those who left under their own volition. Obviously, if we're terminating an employee, we know why they're leaving. We don't need to conduct the exit interview. It's the people that are leaving. Hey, I'm going to go down the street for a quarter more in an hour, or I'm going to, leave for a myriad of reasons. We want to find out what those reasons are. And if it is, they're going down the street for a quarter more an hour, do we need to look at our compensation system? Are we in lockstep with the market rates for the local geographic area? Is that something that we need to address? Or if you're starting to find out that people are leaving because of this one particular boss, they're kind of chasing these people out of here, then we might need to look at, hey, does that person really need to be in charge of people? Or is that a great deal of detriment? In fact, a story related to that, one particular organization I worked for, we found out that most of the turnover that we had in the organization was under this one supervisor. In fact, she had more turnover under her than all the supervisors and managers in the entire organization combined.
That's pretty bad.
Once you say, hey, boss, look at these statistics, you kind of have to pay attention to those things. We are bleeding great talent, and it's because of this one person. Why is that happening? And that starts to give you the information that you need to start addressing these issues.
Now, I know you do facilitating and training. What kind of training do you do related to HR?
Great question. So I focus on where most of the culture is predicated, and that's leadership. So you can look to any organization out there. The culture of that organization is largely stipulated by how that leadership believes and thinks. And that comes from the values and the principles by which they operate. And that trickles down to the entire organization in terms of how they interact with one another, in terms of how they serve their customers, their clients, internally, how they relate to one another as well. So I focus on those greatest needs. And those greatest needs, as I see it, are leaders. And, when you really look at the fact that we have now 3 generations in the workforce who have received little to no formal or informal leadership development, and they're getting ready to take the helm of these organizations from the baby boomers who are retiring en masse, that's a glaring issue that needs to be addressed. And so that's what drives me on a regular basis, is a great deal of concern for the future of the workforce. And I think that this is a golden opportunity right now when people are starting to question everything. It's like change management. When we go through change, there are phases that we go through, and the phases begin with an ending, believe it or not. Typically when people think about change, they think about that new thing that's coming. Well, really, change starts with an ending of what once was. And then we go into the chaos phase. And the chaos phase is where we are right now, where things are uncertain, where it's not the new thing yet, and it's still not the old thing that we just left. So this is the phase where we start to come up with ideas. We're brainstorming. We're trying to regulate and normalize the environment. And that's when we start getting creative and start positing new ways of being and interacting and performing our business. And that too will then begin to normalize and standardize. And then we can start to really see the productivity go up and the engagement go up as a result of that.
Now, let me ask you this. If a company, let's say maybe a director of a company, asks you to come in because he or she is losing a lot of employees, but they are the problem. And maybe they're toxic, or maybe they haven't been trained or mentored to be, a very effective leader. How do you deal with that?
A lot of questions. I think it stands to reason that most adults don't like to be told what to do. We're pretty independent, and we're pretty ego driven, and not least of which are those leaders of organizations. The egos that got them there are also the egos that potentially are preventing some high level performance as well. And so, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And so by asking some poignant questions around, why do you think that this is happening? What's going on here? What could we be doing differently? And, it's kind of the first principles thinking, is let's take it down to the most basic elements and pull those basic elements apart and really say, what's happening in this element? What's happening in this area? What's happening in this area? And that gives us a blank slate for beginning to redevelop what we know to be our most attractive vision of what we want. And when we start identifying what that attractive vision is, then we reverse engineer the methodology to achieve that particular vision. And then we can compare that to what exists currently, and we can see the severe gaps that exist. And so it's not a matter of pointing the finger, it's your fault or it's your fault. Let's look at what we have existing right now, and let's see if those are gaps that we can close those gaps or retool this in some way, shape, or form that's going to help you achieve better outcomes.
Yeah. Ryan, when you go into a company and you tell, at the end of the outcome, and you tell the person that, okay, you're not going to come out and say you're the problem, but it's obvious he or she is the problem. Do you get a lot of resistance or resentment from that?
Oh, no question. Yeah. And, talk about resignation and termination. I've had to fire clients, and what I mean by that is they've contracted me to consult with them only to say, it's just not going to work with us because there's only so much I can do. And in terms of that, if you're not willing to do some things differently than you had before, I'm not sure why I'm here, because that's why you originally called me in. And if, we get to the point where the rubber meets the road and you're not willing to adjust the way you're thinking or the way you're approaching things, then there's very little that we can do together. And so I've had to terminate clients as a result of that.
Now, both of us have heard this over and over through the years. We don't have it in the budget for this training, for this leadership, or anything that would promote or mentor, the employees. What kind of advice do you have for leadership in a company, managers in a company?
I would ask them how much they've budgeted for turnover this year.
That's powerful. That's tweetable, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that's the reality that they're facing. If they're not willing to address these issues, they're going to face a great deal of turnover. And so the turnover is going to cost exponentially more than the training in and of itself. I mean, I'm pretty humble about my trainings. For $5,000 a day, I could come in and do a training with you guys and give you a roadmap and action plan in terms of implementing those behavioral competencies and new processes and procedures. And that would be a fraction of the cost for turnover for one individual. Well, I mean, the math kind of, shows you very clearly what's in your best interest in terms of your strategy in dealing with this.
Okay, but what about small companies that really, truly do not have the money, or maybe a startup company? How can you help them if they're on a very, very tight budget?
I think sometimes that there's a great deal of expertise within an organization that's untapped. They are so busy wrapped up in the operational components of the organization that they don't necessarily see that they have an opportunity or take the time to share their expertise. For all intents and purposes, they're subject matter experts. And so in their particular field, and that's why they have this organization, because they're passionate about electricity or engineering or whatever it may be. So to what extent are you sharing your expertise and your knowledge and bringing people along? They don't need me to really do that, but sometimes they need me to come in and point that out to them. Is, hey, you've got an opportunity here. What are you doing to develop the next generation to come along behind you? And it's not as much as, you're setting people up for success to replace you. You're setting people up for success because rising tides raises all ships. And so why not share your expertise? Why not engage in cross-training? And cross-training is one of those kind of opportunities that's very untapped in organizations. And I also like the idea of what's called reverse mentoring. You typically think of mentoring as someone who is aged and wizened as a result of their experience.
Yeah.
And that aged, wizened person really brings along and provides tutelage to the young novice. Well, the reverse mentoring is the idea that the young novice, who is so technically savvy, in fact, they're digital natives, they don't know life without technology, that's an opportunity to share their expertise with the aged and wizened professional that's in the workforce. And I see a great deal of opportunity for that. I know a lot of people.
I just heard something I never heard before. Digital natives.
Yes, yes.
That's a good one.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, they kind of shot out of the womb and had a device in their hand before they could even talk.
Ryan, who is more important, employee or the employer?
What an interesting question. I don't think I've been asked that one before, Dawn. Who's more important?
I've been known to ask questions like that.
The employer or the employee? Well, you wouldn't have employees without an employer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, it's one of those situations that one is necessary for the other. And I don't know that there is one that's more important, but I think that it stands to reason that one would exist prior to the other. So from the standpoint of importance being that their existence validates the existence of another, I could see that the employer would come first. But in terms of importance, I think they have equal importance. Take it from a standpoint of if the employer is trying to grow a company and they don't have enough of themselves or employees, they can't be successful in that endeavor. So I think it's a mutual relationship. And I think that has oftentimes been forgotten. We are coming off the heels of a notion of a real authoritarian model of leadership. Command and control, do what I tell you because I'm your boss. And that notion really has a predominant environment to it. And that predominant environment is one-way communication. I'm going to tell you what to do. And your only response is, when I say jump, how high? Well, that one-way communication, that one-way directive, authoritarian approach to leadership is really lost on most people. And that's really exhibited in the younger generations, beginning with Gen X. The Gen X, generation, their motto is do it your own way, forget the rules. Well, that flies in the face of everything that the boomers and seniors believe in, very process oriented, very, very much strict adherence to culture and social norms and things of that nature, where the millennials are going to blow everything up in terms of, they're not loyal to any of those kind of things. It's all about flexibility. It's all about who cares if you do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 times faster than you ever expected. I still did it. Right? I don't have to go to an office, and sit there from 9 to 5 to be able to prove that I'm working.
So Ryan, as we wrap up, share with the listeners your services and how to contact you.
Oh, thank you. I'd be delighted. So once again, Ryan McShane, and my business is called HR Evolution, and you can find us at www.hrevolutionllc.com. And if you want to email me, you can find me and contact me at rmcshane@hrevolutionllc.com. In terms of my services, there are 3 main tiers that I provide. It's general HR consulting. I also provide an on-call HR service. And then leadership and employee development. And so we have a cadre of professional development courses that we provide both virtually and in person. And I also support people in career transition. That's a little passion project of mine that I've been writing resumes for over 15 years, Dawn. And
oh my gosh, and they change all the time.
And well, they do. They do. But I tell you what has been the advantage is being in human resources. I know what HR professionals are looking for in top candidates. I know what hiring managers are looking for in top candidates. I also know how the AI algorithms work. They're keyword based, and how to appeal to that for the benefit of my clients.
Yeah. Ryan, it's been great seeing you again and talking to you. To the listeners, stay empowered. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Ryan. We appreciate your guidance and wisdom.
It's been my pleasure, Dawn. Thank you for having me.